I'm talking about elites. The elites are not just simply groups of people. They are also groups in terms of companies in this country who have and hold dominant positions in our community. We've talked, for example, about electricity retailers and generators and the dominance or the sort of cartel monopoly that they are. Supermarkets, another really good example. But one of the most dominant monopolies owned by, I have to say, the New Zealand government is Air New Zealand. And the most recent news in the last 24 hours is that Air New Zealand have hiked their prices to go to Coldplay concerts. Now, I'll never go and see Coldplay, sorry. Go and listen to that ambient crap if you want to, but real music probably stopped in the late 70s, early 80s, and after that it's just derivative. But anyhow, Coldplay, very popular, acknowledged. And they've got 3 concerts in Auckland, which go, I think, they run every second day. But they're going to be, is it later this month? Air New Zealand have tripled, according to latest media reports, their air prices to travel to Auckland in consequence of the demand that they know they are there. Are they exploiting their monopoly? Are they, in actual fact, usurious bastards? Do they particularly punish the provinces and the regions of this country? We're joined now by the Chief Executive of Consumer New Zealand, Jon Duffy. Jon, welcome to the show. Love to have you on.
Thanks, Michael.
You've been running a campaign now for a very long time about the monopoly privileges that Air New Zealand enjoy and at their pricing, predatory pricing strategies, you might argue. Good, excellent, that's why you're on the show, and I share all of your views. But what effect is this campaign having, and who needs to change to stop that?
Well, I think all of the questions you asked in your intro there are really important ones, and ones we don't actually have an answer for. We have suspicions, and we have kind of anecdotal evidence, and we have our experience as consumers of air travel, but we don't know for sure. We don't know what the dynamics are for sure that are acting on Air New Zealand and other players in the market's pricing structures to produce what the end consumer pays. And what we think needs to happen, and what we're campaigning for at the moment, is government to order a market study into aviation in New Zealand, which would encompass Air New Zealand obviously as the most dominant player, all of the other airlines, as well as the dynamic that exists with the airports, which are natural monopolies in their own geographic regions as well.
Okay, so you want an inquiry from the government. The Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs is the Honourable Andrew Bailey. He's had a bit of a checkered past, but he's still there, so good on him. Have you talked to him about that?
Yes, we have, and he's indicated that he thinks the Commerce Commission has other priorities, and so this isn't a priority for them. We disagree. There's a market studies team within the Commerce Commission that doesn't have a market study on at the moment. We think this would be an appropriate next one, but the Minister doesn't see fair pricing in the aviation sector as a priority for New Zealand consumers.
Did he say why?
The rationale he's provided to us and provided publicly was he wants the Commerce Commission to concentrate on implementing the findings of other market studies. Probably supermarkets and banking would be the most applicable there before taking on a new one.
Okay,
and look,
so
that
basically
is a legit thing. They should be, but the way the Commerce Commission is structured is there are separate teams within the Commission that work gets passed on to once a market study is completed. The market studies team is a ring-fenced group that needs some work, and we think this would be a good one to feed them.
Okay. The other issue, of course, is that I can understand. So they're saying it's a resourcing, if you like, issue rather than a priority issue.
I get a sense it's a mixture. I think perhaps if another topic came up, the Minister might say, well, no, that is more of a priority. I don't know what that topic is. But he's suggested that finishing the implementation of recommendations from other market studies is a higher priority than starting a new one at this stage.
Having said that, the Commerce Commission is relatively independent. They can, of their own volition, inquire into these matters. They're responsible for doing so, aren't they, legally?
They have a power under the Commerce Act that they can initiate their own market study. I've not had discussions with the Commerce Commission on whether they would. I think, given the potential breadth of the study, they'd want some guidance from government because, as a responsible Crown entity, kicking off a market study that has no hope of having the recommendations implemented could be seen as not a good use of taxpayer money. So they'd really need to be convinced that the government was on board before they kick something off.
Having said that, the Commerce Commission's a toothless wonder of God knows and waste of money. Anyhow, I'm struggling to remember the last time the Commerce Commission had anything useful to contribute to the New Zealand consumer space. Can you think of an example?
Yesterday they came out and confirmed that petrol stations in Thames had been, in effect, gouging for the last wee while and did quite a detailed analysis of what was going on and why that was bad. That practice has subsequently changed given the Commission's intervention, so I would deem that as pretty helpful.
I'd assume that was particularly pathetically small, actually. Petrol station in Thames, good on you. You've got an entire leadership and consumer organisation based in Wellington, and you've come up with petrol stations in Thames. It seems quite pathetic to me. Does it not seem slightly odd to you when there are lots of other examples of that?
Well, actually, Thames was the most blatant example, and it was kind of consumers in Thames getting together, mobilising and putting a campaign together that drew the Commission's attention to it. So I think the fact that they've got
you started it up, did you? And so the Commerce Commission was responding to it?
No, it was a private group of consumers in Thames, I think based around a Thames radio station, got together and said, why are we paying so much more for petrol than neighbouring towns in the Coromandel? And it turns out that retail pricing was being based not off the wholesale price of fuel, but off of some other metric, which was tying the price of fuel to inflation effectively, but not what the petrol companies were actually paying for their fuel. And the Commission's called that out and says you can't do that, and the practice has stopped. So, your question was, have they done anything that's had an effect recently?
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. I was sort of expecting something slightly grander, but there you go. And you're not here to defend the Commerce Commission at the end of the day, and I shouldn't be asking you to do so. All right, you've only got anecdotal evidence, you say. Now, I accept you're an NGO, you're a subscription-driven. I'm one of your subscribers, for example, to Consumer. Is there any proof, other than folk getting in contact with you, people who are listening now, saying, hey, these people have screwed me, that you could possibly generate that you think would move other political parties for an investigation? I mean, there's more than just Andrew Bailey, for example. He's got two coalition partners. There's the Labour Party, good God, the Greens. You think they might get involved? Are there any other political organisations that might take your evidence seriously?
Well, I think perhaps New Zealand First might be interested in it. I mean, this is a cost of living issue.
Absolutely.
We're suggesting that, given the constraints of transportation in New Zealand, particularly if you're in a regional area, often flying is your only option to get where you need to be in a timely manner. And often Air New Zealand's your only option if you live in particular regions. And Air New Zealand's, very quick to point out, in fairness to them, that we have what's called an open skies regime in New Zealand. So anyone can come in and set up and compete with Air New Zealand. The problem is that there are obvious barriers to entry. For example, Air New Zealand owns a lot of airport assets around the country. I mean, people might not be aware that, they own baggage conveyor belts and the gangways that lead out to planes at certain airports, and have the ability to restrict access to those assets to new airlines wanting to set up, or even incumbents that are competing against them. So there are various complexities within this market that suggest competition isn't happening on an even playing field, accepting the fact that there's one dominant player that has, over 80% market share. In a market like that, you need everything else working really fairly because you've got such a dominant player. What we're suggesting is you've got a dominant player and actually the scales are tipped in their favour over and above their large market share.